Hi, everyone. This is your People Behind the Science podcast host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and I'm excited to have you here with us for episode 845 with our guest, Dr. Nirosha Murugan. We encourage you to take a moment to visit us at peoplebehindthescience.com to listen to some of our past episodes, find our recommended book list, and more. And we hope you'll subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform. Now, we have another wonderful conversation on the way from today's guest. So get ready to meet another one of our exceptional people behind the science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to People Behind the Science. Today, I am excited to be speaking with our guest scientist, Dr. Nirosha Murugan. So, Nirosha, welcome to the show today. How are you?
I'm doing well today. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, and I'm excited about our conversation, and I'm looking forward to getting into some of the details of your career, your life, and your work. But before we jump in, let me first take a moment to tell our listeners a little bit more about you and how you got to where you are today. So listeners, Nirosha is a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Tissue Biophysics, as well as Distinguished Research Chair and Assistant Professor in the Department of Health Sciences at Wilfrid Laurier University. She was awarded her bachelor's degree in behavioral neuroscience, her master's degree in biophysics, and her PhD in biomolecular sciences from Laurentian University. Afterwards, Nirosha conducted postdoctoral research at the Allen Discovery Center at Tufts University, and during that time, she also served as a teaching fellow at Harvard University in the Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology. She also served on the faculty at Algoma University before joining the faculty at Wilfrid Laurier University in 2024. Now, Nirosha was the recipient of a Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, or NSERC, postgraduate scholarship, the Governor-General Award Bronze Medal from the Government of Canada, and she was also awarded an Optica Foundation Award to advance optics research. And Nirosha, today we are so excited to get to know more about your science, of course, but also more about you. So can you tell us, what do you like to do when you're not doing science?
One of the most important roles outside of science that I play is that I'm a mother to a now 6-year-old beautiful daughter. So I enjoy spending time with her, watching her creativity develop, but also for myself and for my mindset, I do archery. Olympic recurve archery is something that I've been doing for quite a while now. And I'm also a recreational pilot. So I enjoy flying and feeling that weightlessness for a brief moment.
I love that. I think you're maybe the first person I've ever met who I know who does archery. How did you get into it?
Actually, in grad school, I was looking for something to do that wasn't in the lab, something that can kind of help my energy and mindset flow. So I just kind of discovered it. And I realized that it's something that I can sharpen and something also that I can do throughout my life. Like, it's not something that I would have to restrict to because my joints were deteriorating. If I kept at it, I could do it for the rest of my life.
I think that's amazing. And flying as well. How did you get into that?
So flying was my dream since I was a child. If I didn't get into the science that I did, I would have got into aerospace engineering. Aviation in general is one of the most brilliant aspects of our human creativity, that we can get this tin can that's super heavy to float through the air is kind of marvelous. And I just enjoy that aspect.
Oh, very cool. What kind of vehicle do you fly, I suppose?
Just a 4-seater Cessna, nothing too big or large or a jet. It's just something small.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, what's the farthest place you've ever flown to?
From Sault Ste. Marie to London, Ontario.
I think that is absolutely remarkable. And it's wonderful to hear about all these different hobbies and facets that scientists have to their lives, because I think so many people just assume that you live science every moment of every day.
Yeah, I think that science is a big role in my life. It's how I think and navigate through life. And I try to bring my hobbies and interests into my science and other way around.
I think that is absolutely wonderful. And I'd love to talk about your science next. So, Nirosha, how do you describe your work to people who might not be familiar with your particular field or who are outside of science?
I'm a biophysicist. That's the work that I kind of involve myself right now. And really what I'm interested in is how our bodies, our cells, our tissues communicate with each other from the molecular scale all the way up to our organ and our physiology, our consciousness. How do we get that information there and what kinds of information? So this is where that physics comes in, is we look at that information in the form of magnetism, such as light, electromagnetic fields, and also electricity. So we kind of use these kinds of signals to see how do we get very specific shapes and patterns, and how do these signals go wrong in diseases like cancer. This is kind of the main areas that my lab is focused on, and we develop tools to help record these signals and then tools to reprogram these signals to bring ourselves back to healthy state.
That is amazing. Well, your research sounds fascinating, and I think that can be a motivational factor for a lot of scientists, just kind of getting in the lab and making these new discoveries. But I also love collecting little quotes and sayings and mantras that I think can be very helpful to get you through a tough time. So, Nirosha, do you have a favorite quote or a saying or something that really motivates you?
A quote that I came by very recently, actually, probably in the last 2 weeks, that I reflect on every day is that, I don't know who said it, but it was something like, wounds are a portal for our light to interact with our bodies and our environment, something along this line. What this means for me is that wounds, in my subjective experience, are things that are difficult or challenges, and light is, to me, a form of energy that we can interact with. Physical light, inherent light, and this is very deeply entangled to the kind of research that I do. So I see this as any challenge that exists through my day or in my life, I can mitigate by interacting it with this pretty luminous point of view.
Well, I think that is a fantastic motivation, and I love the tie into your specific research area as well. And I think as a scientist, you get to work with a lot of amazing people. And I think these people can come in many different forms, whether it's mentors, role models, collaborators, peers, and I think they can have a big impact on you. So when you look over the course of your career, Nirosha, were there particular people who really helped you get to where you are today, or who you really looked up to as role models or mentors?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, it was just Thanksgiving a couple of weeks ago. So I definitely used this time to reflect within our lab of all the important people that have helped shape me as someone who thinks about life and science. My PhD advisor, Dr. Michael Persinger, who is no longer with us now, but has left a huge imprint in my life and many others' life. He was not only my PhD supervisor, but he was very much a role model in my life. And it's mainly because of how he viewed and navigated science. And he worked on topics that were very controversial. So not only did I learn the actual technical details about science and methods, but I learned about how to communicate ideas and how to handle controversial topics and ideas in a rigorous manner. I think that was very, very important. That shaped me into the work that I'm doing right now. And I don't have to do conventional science, whatever that means, but I can explore the frontier if I'm grounded in rigorous science. So he's someone I think about all the time, and I'm thankful for him giving me so many opportunities that I normally wouldn't have had. And then a few other people that have, again, shaped me is my postdoc advisors, both of them, Dr. Michael Levin and Dr. David Kaplan from Tufts University. Both of these humans are very different, but again, have shown me ways to think, how to mentor other students, how to get the young minds excited, but also academia and science is sort of a long game. How do we keep pace and keep the excitement even when experiments aren't working? So there's these three mentors that have significantly shaped my life that I'm extremely thankful for.
I think that's wonderful. And I love this point that you brought up of needing to pace yourself in science. I think it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Absolutely. And it's a marathon where you kind of fumble a couple of times and still have to find out how we can kind of keep pace.
Mm-hmm. And now this PhD advisor, you mentioned this really important point here about how to navigate controversial topics. And I think this is something that people struggle with in science a lot. And oftentimes we shy away from controversy. So what do you have in terms of advice that maybe you were able to glean from your PhD advisor that our listeners might be able to apply if they're encountering these controversies or trying to navigate how to deal with maybe differences of opinion within their field?
I think the differences of opinion part is one of the most beautiful parts of us as human beings, is that even though we have similar brain structures, we all think very differently based on our life experiences. And that's something that we weave into what we do in our work every single day. So new insights, new perspectives. And I often think about if we all studied the same textbook and we all looked at life through the exact same lens, we're not going to make much progress in the diversity of innovation that we can have. So I think there's always going to be a bell curve of people, a normal distribution of ideas. Some ideas are just going to be small scale, kind of repetitive, incremental, some might call it, but there's also going to be, and we need the big picture thinkers and people who are willing to push the bounds of ideas. And I think where maybe some of the criticism might come in is that how do we address innovation and big picture ideas with reality? And how do we make this a real thing for our society to make something tangible? And that's a great question to ask, and it should be asked. And I think if we ask those kinds of constructive questions, then we can take controversial or maybe non-normal questions into serious landscapes.
I like that. I think bringing that rigor to these, what might seem like outlandish ideas, is part of the beauty of science, right? The things that people thought weren't possible hundreds of years ago are absolutely happening today. So I think that innovation is critical.
It goes back to why I think about flying. Somebody someday said, hey, what if humans could fly?
Right, exactly.
Do we grow wings or do we create artificial wings? And now look at us. We're jet setting all over the world, outside of our planet. So I think it does take somebody to ask outlandish questions, but then it also takes someone to kind of take those questions and ground it in something that we can do tangibly.
Well, I love that message. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about your own story, Nirosha. Can you maybe take us back to the beginning of your scientific journey and walk us through how you first started thinking about science and engineering and how you got interested in your own particular field?
I've always been interested in kind of like how our bodies work. As young children, we explore with what we can do, our limits, we push our bodies to different capabilities. And I was also grateful. My grandfather was a physician, a general practitioner who was open to talking to me about the body, physiology, how it worked, and I had access to his books. But also, again, he was a unique individual because he was also very interested in spirituality. So he spent as much time as he did in medicine as he did in spirituality. And often a lot of those conversations, he crossed over to me and we bounced ideas off him. So I think that's where the seed was planted, to be able to ask questions and then bridge across fields that you don't normally think could be bridged, like spirituality and medicine. Like, what does that mean? And this kind of really brought me to this idea of the brain, of where does religion, where does spirituality come from? Is it from our brains? And then I was really interested in how our brain works. And I thought I wanted to be a psychiatrist to help understand this brain, because as I watched my grandfather, if you saw a broken bone, you can see it, you can kind of fix it. A dysfunctional heart or a liver, there was something tangible there to see and to fix. And what fascinated me about the brain is that when there was dysfunction of personality or mental state, you can't see that, or so we think. And how do we then fix this if we want to have a good health? So that's where the seed was planted, asking these questions of how do we interact with our world? How do we interact with our bodies? What's communicating? How is that information flowing? And then this kind of took me to my undergrad, where I wanted to study neuroscience and study the brain. And I happened to meet and be in this program, behavioral neuroscience, with Michael Persinger. And the way that he taught and how he integrated these big picture ideas absolutely changed my life. He taught behavioral neuroscience from all dimensions, from neurochemistry to neuropharmacology to neuroanatomy. So you had the full spectrum of how information was computed in the brain. And he was a neuropsychologist, so he often brought in psychological assessment, so like another dimension of brain activity and behavior. So that's kind of where my development happened. And the question is kind of seated there. And I continued this training at the same institution, which so many people advised me against. Like, you're ruining your careers if you stay in the same place. You're not going to get diversity. Again, another point of friction and controversial topics. But I ended up staying because of the unique training that I had. I don't think I would have had anywhere else. And it was very diverse.
So how did you decide to, pursue biophysics and then subsequently biomolecular sciences, starting from the behavioral neuroscience realm?
So the undergraduate training that I had is trying to understand brain and behavior, because I had this very strong understanding of neuropharmacology, of receptor interactions, drug interactions, and how that scaled to what we understand of ion channel dynamics and behavior. While studying this, it felt uncomfortable to me to be like, something is missing. If we had all these receptors in the same place, why do we have our experiences that are so different? I significantly remember the sleep chapter in the Principles of Neuroscience, one of the hallmark textbooks in neuroscience. And sleep seems so regulated and so patterned across all animals, including us, yet it has such a profound effect that's very different. Sleeping 4 hours for some people is more efficient than someone else, and someone needs to sleep at a certain time. So there's just so much variability and heterogeneity that the molecular chemical material that I was learning didn't seem like it was enough and something was missing. So that's kind of where I turned to physics. And I was like, hey, can we look at our bodies as this physical system, that's open loop system that computes information in a different context? And what is that information? That's kind of where the physics was introduced to me. It was a need to complete an incomplete story.
Very cool. And it sounds like the biomolecular sciences then in your PhD just built on that, kind of expanding your expertise in these specific areas related to neuroscience.
Exactly. With biophysics, and the reason why I really appreciate this field now is because it's trying to integrate what we know about the biomolecular landscape, the signaling cascade that we do know, the molecular mechanisms, with these first principles ideas of physics. And it can maybe also help us with finding out what we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Again, these were non-advisable routes that I've had from senior advisors, but I'm very grateful that I've had this diverse experience because it really opened up the door to look for new patterns and new networks in what we understand about our health and disease.
Absolutely. And clearly that was not a career ruining decision because you went on to do a successful postdoc there at the Allen Discovery Center at Tufts. Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience?
Yeah. So just to kind of help contextualize that, my PhD was in developing these applied physical signals, specifically magnetic fields, to reprogram cancer. And one question that comes up is like, how do magnetic fields interact with biology? We understand that a drug binds to a protein and there's something that happens. But how does something that we can't see, like a magnetic field, interact with something that we can see, like a receptor? And this brought me to this world of ion channels. And that's kind of what led me to Dr. Michael Levin, who's one of the world's leading experts in this area. I just love the way that he thinks in a very big picture. And he also was just as open-minded to very complex and out there ideas. And so we resonated quite well, I would say. So we kind of explored this question is, if we were going to reprogram tissues, something as complex as a limb, how do we do this? Is it just the chemicals that we have to integrate? Is there other signals that we have to integrate? And that's where our project started with the regeneration work at Tufts.
Oh, that's really cool. And maybe as a next step, can you share what your experience was then as you were finishing your postdoc and preparing for the next step, the sort of dreaded job search for a faculty position? How did you go about that?
Well, throughout grad school, I feel like there's kind of structure that you have with your primary advisor, with your committee. There's like this sort of support network that ensures that you're making that linear goal towards the end of your PhD. You get into your postdoc and all that structure that you had falls apart because there's really no bounds in terms of or protocol to get a faculty position beyond you should have some papers, some really great reference letters. And I think that's pretty much it. Maybe some cool experiences here and there, but there's nothing really, this is the recipe, especially since the job market was so hard. So I went into my postdoc with the sole interest of trying to just understand fundamentally how these physical signals interacted with the chemical signals. And as I was going through my postdoc, I realized, oh, okay, maybe I can do this myself in my own lab. And I loved mentoring. That was also such an important thing for me in my postdoc that I had Dr. Levin give me the opportunity for. Is I had a great group of undergraduates that I got to work with and technicians. So in my postdoc, I learned very quickly to make my postdoc not just about the science, but also how to lead. And it's not just leading an academic lab, but how do I lead young minds to thinking critically? How do we try to identify misinformation? How do we communicate ideas? And this is all that I learned in my postdoc beyond just the science, but leadership. That's very important. I'm very thankful for that as well.
Absolutely. And then in terms of picking where you wanted to go for a faculty position, once you committed to that path, how did you find your way to Algoma University?
Timing. The academic market is stressful, as many people would know. And there were some decisions that went into the equation, as it probably does for many people, is also family, work-life balance. I gave birth to my beautiful daughter in the tail end of my postdoc. So a different set of concerns and worries came in of like, okay, how do I get enough money to raise her? And the postdoc salary at the time was not sufficient, I would say, at the very least. So I think the decision to where to go for faculty positions, it was more than just the science, but also work-life balance, access to resources, to family, things like this, but also an environment that will allow me to grow and foster my scientific curiosity. That was very important as well.
I love that. And then later you made the transition to Wilfrid Laurier University, where you are now. Can you talk about that transition that was just last year in 2024?
Yeah, it was not too long ago in the distant past. The decision to start this, again, was more on the resources. As I was building my research program, access to resources became very important. And Wilfrid Laurier, being next to a very large institution like University of Waterloo and being within the Southern Ontario University network, allowed me to accelerate my research more than I did in the North. And I think that also speaks to some of the equity gaps that we have in research of universities that are in under-resourced areas that might be limiting the type of research that can be done.
Well, that makes sense. Well, I'm excited to hear that your lab is able to pursue some of these really cool projects that you're working on. So let's talk a little bit more about your research. Nirosha, is there a particular project that you have going on at the moment that you think is just the most fascinating?
I'm a little biased. I feel like all my projects are very good. But there's one that is the top of my list right now, which is the work that we recently published that our brains emit light and we can record this light non-invasively from the outside of our heads that can give us some insight about what our brains are doing. And I think this is extremely exciting for me because one, we found a way to kind of measure this light non-invasively. We don't have to put any probes in. We don't have to genetically modify anything. But we can actually read our biology in real time, non-invasively. So this is something that I'm really excited about now.
I think this is remarkable. And for our listeners out there who maybe haven't done a little bit of reading on this topic, this may seem surreal, the idea that your brain is emitting light. Can you maybe give us a little bit more insight into the magnitude of the light, the kind of light, what cells are emitting this light, whatever details you know at this point?
I'll also start off by saying, like, I'm not the first one to do this. We're just kind of extending the field in this area, but this has been known for about 100 years now with the original work with Alexander Gurwitch, who showed that potentially plants can be interacting with light between each other as a form of communication. And again, over the many years, people have shown that very, very weak levels of light, and we call these biophotons, or now colloquially, they're called ultra-weak photon emissions. Ultra-weak being the key word here because the intensity of light, we get about 10 to 100 photons per second, which is several thousand times weaker than a dim moonlight on a very dim night. So it's very, very weak. You cannot see it through the naked eye, but we can measure this using single photon detectors. These are detectors that one might find within their microscope or within a telescope. But we use this now to kind of point it towards our body to measure what light is being emitted. And the question that you asked about where this light is coming from is a very good one. There's a lot of hypotheses, strong hypotheses, that because they seem to be correlated to metabolism and metabolic activities, that it could be coming from the mitochondria. There's some physics in here that would support this, but there's some experiments that we're doing right now, which I'm really excited about, that would help us very concretely prove that the light is tied to mitochondrial function, and we can kind of record this in real time. And with the mitochondria being involved in so many processes of our life, this would be very profound to say that if this is true, and we can have this relationship proven, then we can use light as a readout of our mitochondrial health. And that's something that we're actively working on right now in the lab.
Well, I think this is so exciting. And the idea of having this non-invasive way to get a pulse on how things are going in the brain, I think would be really attractive for a lot of different clinical conditions and just thinking about the broad impacts that it could have on medicine as a whole.
Yeah. One other aspect that I maybe didn't mention or should mention is I'm very much of an applied person. I like taking what we know and what do we do with this information? How do we take it to the next step? So knowing that there's light coming out of biology, how can we leverage this to read our health? Maybe not just disease states, but our regular states of health. What can we measure from this? So that's something I'm excited about.
Well, it sounds like there are still many questions to answer in this research area, and I'm very excited to continue following your work going forward. But I know it's not all exciting days and things working very smoothly. I know there are so many challenges and struggles and failures that you have to face as a scientist, particularly when you're doing these cutting edge innovative projects. So Nirosha, can you share with us what is an example of something that you've struggled with or maybe a failure that you've had? And can you walk us through how you got through it?
There's different scales of failure.
Right.
Say just the ones that happen on a daily basis, equipment failing in the middle of an experiment, or just you being so tired and forgot to hit the save button and you lost all your data that you've recorded for the last day. I think those things happen to the best of us. And I think we try to overcome that by trying to be organized and structured. But other challenges, and I wouldn't call them failures, I use them as learning opportunities, is especially in the work that I do, there's not a lot of people and experts that I can find to communicate with, bounce ideas off of. Being in the optics and photonics world, there's a lot of physicists that are in this area, but I'm trying to understand these signals in biology. So when I go and talk with the biological experts, the language and the language barrier that we have between these two communities has been challenging. And I think this is an opportunity for us to try to build a better language model, in this case, to help us understand each other so we can build new tools to work in this space. So I think that's one challenge that I'm trying to overcome. And then again, also expertise. It's not just me. It's my entire lab of 17 brilliant people. Getting the right expertise and how do they communicate with each other? How do they communicate their failures in their research has been also something I'm learning as we go on.
Absolutely. And I think your response there, you sort of highlighted that your work is really a bridge between these different fields. And I absolutely agree that there can be the complete other language with different jargon and ways of communicating, ways of thinking about the science that really just doesn't necessarily translate between different fields.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of where innovation is. We do need to understand each silo, obviously, enough so that we can bridge them. But that's also another layer of information that we're missing if we're trying to understand something as complex as our bodies.
Certainly. Well, I appreciate you talking about some of these challenges. And I think it is so important to highlight these because oftentimes people just see the finished product, the exciting successes in science. They don't get to hear all of the struggles that came before these wonderful discoveries. But we love sharing the wonderful discoveries on our show as well. I love hearing success stories from scientists, whether these are just small everyday wins or these really big, meaningful, impactful victories. So, Nirosha, do you have a favorite success story from your lab or your career?
I have two. Mm-hmm. One I'm very proud of, and I often let her know, is all of my trainees are wonderful and great, but I think seeing my trainees who feel like they're underrepresented or feel like they don't have the right portfolio to get into the top schools, really craft their own path. And there are a couple of trainees that I can mention who've done that, who come from very small institutions, who didn't have the opportunities that others may have had, but then also use their own potential to come up with novel ideas that I've helped mentor and then end up in really amazing programs at really large and successful research institutions. So I'm very proud of that because that means that we kind of work together to understand each other and understand our strengths and weaknesses so that we can move their careers to the next step. So that's something I'm very proud of. And then another one is more on the scientific side. I'm extremely proud to have published this paper that just came out in Cell Metabolism a couple of weeks ago with my collaborator, Dr. Martin Picard. It's a new framework to understand our bodies from this energy perspective and energy lens. So I think I'm really proud of that. And I think this could be a really important step forward on how we think about physiology.
Very cool. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with this particular paper? I know submitting the paper is usually not the end of the journey. There's often a lot of things that happen to get it actually ultimately accepted. Was this something that was an easy sell or did you struggle along the way?
I don't think we struggled. He did a lot of the legwork on thinking about the paper, but I think our collaboration helped refine it and have it presented to the wider public. But the impact that it could have is something that we're working on how to communicate this to the wider audience. So this is something that's ongoing. So it's not just about publishing a paper and having it cited a bunch of times on Google Scholar, but also how can the non-scientists, how can everyone access this information and incorporate it into their lives?
Absolutely. So it sounds like you've got a plan to continue working to disseminate this research, but I think you have to celebrate the milestones on that path, and getting the paper accepted and published is a huge one. So how did you celebrate?
I should also mention that Martin and I also share life together. So we celebrated by just going to dinner and appreciating and thinking all the different ways that this can be leveraged in all sorts of different communities.
Well, I love that. I think it's so important, like I said, to take that moment to acknowledge the victory before you're back on the battlefield the next day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you said there is that we kind of view academia as this trench of hardship. And it certainly is. It's definitely not a walk in the park, but I think the moments that we don't have to feel afraid. And I think this is something in my early career, and everybody deals with this. I think about tenure and grants and do I have a paycheck next year or not? I think these are all very much important worries, but I don't think they should impact our science. And if we can get to a place where we can think broadly and freely without having to be worried about these things, I think that can be really profound for humanity.
Absolutely. I think that would be tremendously transformative to be able to focus your mental energy on the big picture questions rather than the daily logistics of survival, right?
Exactly.
Well, Nirosha, it's wonderful to get some insight into these successes and just your experiences throughout your career. But we always encourage people to broaden their perspectives, and we encourage people to pick up a book that they might not consider reading otherwise. So we love getting recommendations from everybody on the show. So do you have a book that you've read and really enjoyed that you would like to recommend, whether it's related to science or not?
There's two. I just finished a book called Matrescence, and it really goes into something that I'm very passionate about, obviously being a mother, but also the trials and tribulations of what this comes with as an academic, as a working mom, and as a very important developmental period in a person's life. We talk about adolescence. There's other points in our life, but I think matrescence is also a very important life milestone. And this book really does a good job of explaining what it is, how this impacts us from a scientific point of view, and also from a personal point of view. So I think that one was very profound and exciting to read. And the other one that I've read several times over is The Tao of Physics. This one is an older book, but it really bridges the modern physics with Eastern mysticism. And I think why this resonates with me so much is because it's a pretty good reflection of my upbringing with my grandfather, of how do we think about some of these mystical experiences from a non-modern science point of view, but from a physics point of view. It kind of asks questions about what objectivity is and things like this. So I really enjoyed that book. It's called The Tao of Physics, and the first one was Matrescence.
Wonderful. Well, Nirosha, thank you so much for these recommendations. I'm excited to add them to our website for our listeners to find. And we've talked about some of the different places that you've done your academic training. And I think travel is a huge part of scientific careers, whether you're going to conferences, working with collaborators and colleagues all over the world. This is something that people don't necessarily realize is part of the package. So we love highlighting some of the travel opportunities that scientists get. So do you have a favorite place that your science has taken you?
I do have to say, in the last 2 years, my science has taken me to very interesting parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Selfishly, I would like to say that it's brought me together at these conferences that are related to quantum biology. Earlier this year, those that are interested in understanding life and biology through the lens of quantum physics met in Florence, Italy. And that's one of my most memorable, I would say, travel experiences. One, because we all got together and it's a very small community and we really got to share our work. It was also very interesting to see that there's people who are interested in quantum biology that isn't their main area of research, but it's something that they've always been interested in. They're kind of opening to this idea of really non-conventional ideas and theories and topics. So that was really exciting and encouraging. And also, on a completely non-scientific note, it was one of the most interesting experiences because I lost my luggage.
Oh, no.
For a week-long conference. And all I had was the clothes that I was wearing, which was very athletic and non-conference-like. That was quite the experience. It taught me something about myself, that I can live a very minimalistic life.
Of course. Well, I love this story. And how did you enjoy Florence? Was this your first time to the city?
It was my first time, and the conference location was in this gorgeous mountains, and I'm not sure if we call it rural, but pretty small town, Lucca, and it was gorgeous. Beautiful days, and earlier this year, around February, I believe, so it was gorgeous weather. It was lovely.
That sounds amazing. Did you get to do any sightseeing or add a couple extra days to the end of your trip in your athleisure wear?
I didn't, mainly because my flight home was also canceled, so I was panicking on how to get home. That was also exciting, but truthfully, I didn't want to go out hiking or anything because I didn't have any other clothes to wear, and I didn't want to be sweating for the rest of the week. That's the honest answer, but did some hiking and walking, and so that was really local in that area, nothing too profound.
Well, this sounds like a very memorable trip. There were highs and lows, right?
Absolutely. It was part of the experience. It was part of the flow of what that conference was about. So it means a lot to me.
Well, absolutely. Well, it sounds like you are just calm in the face of any chaos, which I can truly appreciate as someone who is definitely not that case. So wonderful to hear about this travel opportunity. And I think in addition to going to amazing places, you get to work with just some amazing people as a scientist. And oftentimes in the media, scientists are portrayed a particular way, which is not favorable. It's often very serious and critical and disheveled, if you will. But I know so many of these people I've met in science are funny, amazing, thoughtful, creative people. And I love sharing this human side of science that people don't always get to see by just talking about quirky things that happen or lab traditions or funny memories. So do you have a story of your own, Nirosha, that really captures this human side of science?
Yeah, I mean, most of the talks that we give is very structured and very, very conventional. But yes, we are all humans.
Right.
And I try to really embrace this on a regular basis. I try not to be too stuffy. I try to get people to call me by my name. I'm not defined by the two initials in front of me. I'd like everyone to kind of think of our interactions of way to explore ideas at any scale, whether I'm talking to a postdoc or a high school student. I think everyone has the opportunity to think freely. But something that we do even in our lab, every year, we like to have a lab Olympics.
Ooh.
It's just a time for us to use lab equipment that is fairly cheap to come up with different activities to do, to play games with each other and bond. So that's something that we do. And we have little medals that we've created from Petri dishes that are gold, silver, and bronze. And yearly, there are winners within those categories. So, yeah.
I think that is amazing. So what is your favorite event within the Lab Olympics?
Oh, absolutely. Pipette javelin is my favorite. We have a table with a bucket on either side, and we have to take a pipette. I believe we use a P10. I forget.
Mm-hmm.
Small volume pipettes, and we try to eject the tip of it into the bucket on the other side of the table. And the one with the most tips wins.
That sounds amazing. Now, is there a medal ceremony to award these Petri dish medals?
There is, absolutely.
Of course.
Everyone gathers together and we celebrate our colleagues in true fashion. And then we have a beautiful lunch or dinner, depending on time of day, together to celebrate.
Well, this sounds like an amazing tradition. How did you come up with the idea?
Again, like kind of throughout my own academic journey, I've realized that with my peers in grad school was probably one of the most fun, stressful, life-changing experience where I had to grow up very quickly. And so was my postdoc. And the thing that grounded me is that we were postdocs or grad students, but we also were humans. We bonded regularly in my postdoc every Friday. In the 11 lab, we would have game night after 5 p.m. After a long week of time in the lab of battling ideas. We got together and just play games and got to see a different side of us. And so I wanted to bring that sense of community into my own lab, because once we feel safe in that context, we'll be safe to exchange ideas, even the most quacky ones. So that's something that I've learned and I wanted to bring to my own lab.
Well, Nirosha, I love that. And I absolutely agree that this sort of sense of camaraderie can be transformative in the laboratory. And you have to have this teamwork mentality to be able to address some of these big, difficult questions that you're tackling, because I know there are barriers, whether it's funding, staff, technology, feasibility, equipment, whatever the case may be. If we took away the things that normally hold you back, is there one particular research question that you would want to answer most?
It's kind of what I'm doing right now. What is the full set of information signals in our body and how do they all relate together? Being able to answer that would not only excite me, but I think it would be helping to fill an important gap of how we understand systems that exist within our body.
I think that's remarkable. And I think it's great to hear that you're able to work on the thing that you are the most excited about.
At a different scale, I would say, with the funding status the way it is. But I think with infinite funding status, I think we could make this awesome across scales.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed that those grants keep getting funded. You keep getting more resources to tackle this big question. And I know as a scientist, getting advice at these key moments in your career path can be really helpful. So for our listeners out there who might be on their own scientific journeys or life journeys otherwise, do you have a piece of advice that someone gave you that really helped you that you can share with them today?
There are two. One happened in my graduate school was, if you're not going to apply for it, someone else will. So if I always second guess myself, I'm usually not the biggest champion for myself. Maybe I'm not good enough, or I don't fit the right call. It's not perfectly for me. These are thoughts that still go through my mind. But that quote that my professor of advanced immunology, Asim Kumar, who told me this, is if it's not you, it's going to be someone else. And why not try?
I love that. And what's the second one?
The second one was don't be afraid to be different and to be weird. I say weird is because I've been called this most of my life, and unconventional is a more maybe professional term of calling that. But I think being unconventional is challenging. It's extremely challenging to be different, but it's also sometimes people are looking for different, and that difference can also give us something new. And an advice that my postdoc mentor, Dr. Levin, has mentioned is also being different in where we look for funding is something that we should think about. And with the work that I do, I don't fit into the conventional calls. So we've kind of had to be looking outside of the normal tiers for funding. And with everything that's happening with the scientific funding right now, I think this kind of shakes that up a bit and kind of brings it right to our faces that we need to think about diversifying our resources to do the science that we want to do.
Well, I'm really glad you brought up this point, because I think there's not one recipe for success in science. You're absolutely right. You have to kind of find these alternative paths sometimes in terms of funding or other opportunities. And also there's just this idea of not feeling like you have to fit a particular mold to be a successful scientist or just to be yourself. I think those are tremendously important messages to share with listeners.
Thank you. I'm still pretty early in my career, and I'm still learning on what to do and what not to do. And yeah, I just think that you never know, things could work out. I think this is also important for just a lesson in life.
Absolutely. So if our listeners are curious, Nirosha, and they want to learn more about you, your life, and your research, what is the best way for them to get more information or to get in touch?
So we have a lab website that we try to update with our research and publications. It's the muruganlab.com. But I'm most active on X, which I can throw in my handle and one of the blurbs later. I'm more on LinkedIn, which is just my first name and last name, Nirosha Murugan. And the thing that excites me the most is see how the science, how do people engage with it? Not just scientists, like what are things that worry you and worry us, and how can we learn from that? So yeah, I'm happy to engage with anyone.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing those resources. Listeners, definitely take a moment to get connected with Nirosha on social media, and also take some time to browse her lab website. They've got some great content up there. And Nirosha, it's been such a pleasure to chat with you today. Thank you so much for sharing a part of your story.
Well, thank you so much, Maria. I really appreciate the depth of questions and how you're kind of willing to bridge the scientist to the human, because we are one of the same. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to chat. And listeners, we're always delighted to have you here with us as well. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode of People Behind the Science.